morning and Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome to our first town hall of the new year, 2021. This is actually our 10th town hall overall, and we're delighted to have you here today with us. I want to thank our past chairs of the Society for Leading Medicine, Huntley and Dan Kibitza, for chairing over the last couple of years and hosting these sessions. And I want to welcome Jeremy and Caroline Finkelstein, as well as Catherine and George Masterson, who have graciously agreed to chair our Society for Leading Medicine and to host these events this year. So thank you to all of them. Today we have two of our regulars with us. We have Dr. Sossman here, who will be talking about mostly vaccines as well as some therapies. And we also have Dr. Ashley Drews on the chat box, so please ask questions of her. That's been a very popular feature to be able to get specific questions asked during the course of this. Today's really going to be vaccines for the most part, because that's obviously the hot topic with COVID right now. But before we get to that, it is the new year, and I know many of us will have made many resolutions. Some of us hopefully are still on track, and some of us may be tailing off already. I may be one of those. But we have Natalie Sessions, who is both a registered dietitian and a licensed dietitian with us, who's going to talk about some of those New Year's resolutions and how to eat healthy in the new year. Natalie, we're glad you could join us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boom, and to our hosts and everyone for including wellness. I think everyone, yes, has resolutions on the mind. I mean, maybe a better way to frame it would be just intentions. We have intentions and goals to maintain our health and wellness during these challenging times, which is my brief topic that I'll be taking you through today. So, there's a lot, I think we've all learned that there's a lot of things out of our control externally, but there are many things, and I want to remind you today that when it comes to our health and wellness, there are a lot of things within our control. Every day, each of us has the opportunity to determine our attitude, our words, our actions, our manners, etc. And we'll touch briefly on this today. So I'm going to quickly, in our brief time together, go through useful ways to keep our stress in check. I know most of us are having elevated levels of stress. We want to move daily and eat mindfully, and I'm intending to give you some quick tips on that. Managing all of those things is really helpful for maintaining our health and well-being. So just some reminders here to keep our stress in check. Often when we think about health and wellness, we automatically think about diet and exercise, and stress can sometimes go by the wayside, or we don't prioritize it, or it's the first thing maybe that falls off. And so unfortunately we may unintentionally not keep it as a priority, and this can really weigh on our mental health and well-being. And so we want to put some attention on it to keep it in check, as I mentioned. So the important message I want to provide here is about practicing self-care, and that there are many healthy ways to practice stress. We want you to find techniques that are effective for you, and it might just not be one technique. We may have a whole toolbox of techniques. So it's really important, and you're encouraged to carve out that personal time for your stress management. And the bottom line here is that self-care is not selfish. So really briefly, we won't go through all of the details on this slide, but one of the primary ways we can do this, and a muscle we want to exercise if we're not already doing it, is to develop healthy boundaries with our work and home life, personally and professionally. A lack of boundaries really can be the thing that sets us off from maintaining our health and well-being and the things that are causing us stress. So just this, what you see here on the screen, we want to recognize, define what those boundaries are for ourselves, communicate to those around us what our boundaries are in a very simply stated way, and set the consequences of what happens. So just to give you a simple example, I won't be checking email after 6 p.m. today. So if there's an urgent matter, call the manager on call. Just again, a really simple example that you can take in many levels of your life. So really beneficial for that. It can help us avoid burnout. We can conserve our mental and energy, our emotional energy. We might then have less anger and resentment in these stressful times, be feeling more stable, have more stable, healthy relationships, and more self-esteem. So again, there are a number of ways you see listed here on the slide about exploring different ways we can manage our stress. And one thing I wanted to mention that relates directly to our topic, coming forth here today is that, 80 to 90% of the vitamin D that the body gets is obtained from sunlight. So getting out into the outdoors, whether it's through physical activity or just taking a break, this can help our body with that, sensible sun exposure to boost our moods. And then there's even newer research showing that those that have, the right levels of vitamin D are less susceptible to illness and can really help boost the immune system. So each of you is encouraged to explore that with your healthcare providers and make sure you have adequate vitamin D levels to minimize your exposure to illness. And, another thing, and this kind of goes back to the attitude, is really trying to get in the mindset of cultivating optimism. There's so many things that we can see are challenging and maybe going wrong. So focusing on what's going well, realizing you're not alone, we're all in this together, and then making those efforts to connect and interact in healthy ways. And sometimes we just need to step back and look at the big picture. So one way we want to move daily, there were some questions that came in about physical activity. So here I just wanted to briefly provide you with some guidelines, and that, any movement is better than no movement. So whatever that looks like for you, but these are the official guidelines that we want to strive for: a mix of aerobic activity, strength training, stretching, and really just avoiding being sedentary. So not sitting for long periods of time. So just being mindful of that. And getting that heart rate up, striving for 150 minutes of cardio minimum per week, balancing that out. You see all the benefits listed here related to our endurance, our stamina, our heart health. So these are just those baseline recommendations, just as a reminder for everyone. So again, just like with stress management techniques, we want to find activities that we like, that we enjoy, so that we will do them. And again, it can look different for everyone. These are just a few examples of moderate versus vigorous activity. You can do a combination of both. There are many more than what you see here. So just kind of a sneak peek there, and a friendly reminder to explore different ways to stay physically active. Someone asked in a previous question that was submitted about certain amount of time. Do I need to spend a certain amount of time exercising? So this is the formula, an easy formula you can follow to determine your own target heart rate range. And so you want to do this in a healthy way that works for you in terms of the level of activity, but you want to try and create a target heart rate, or calculate your target heart rate so that you're able to stay in this range for at least 30 to 60 minutes. This will help you stay physically fit and strive for that. So hopefully that addresses that question. And then our last section to discuss today is about eating mindfully. So a few questions were submitted around the nutritional piece of our health and wellness. And, from a big picture point of view, what do I mean, when I'm talking about eating mindfully? So sometimes we lose sight of connecting with the pleasure of food. So just engaging in, all of your senses in the act of what it takes to prepare and even eat your food. So going slowly, chew thoroughly. Remember, your stomach doesn't have teeth. Eating in silence when you can, taking a few minutes, even if it's only brief, and trying to minimize distractions whenever possible. And a really useful tool can be to use a hunger scale or a hunger quotient, like the one you see here on the screen. So your body really ultimately is always the best guide. So if you can master tapping into your own physical hunger cues. We eat for a lot of different reasons: emotional, stress, it's there, it's time. So really focusing more on the physical hunger cues and avoiding being at either end of the spectrum of, famished to stuffed. Let's strive for neutral. And like I said, there were several questions around the nutrients. So as we wrap up here, I'll just touch on these. The bottom line, the overarching recommendation and encouragement is to eat in a balanced way, focusing on a variety of wholesome foods, balancing your plate, and indulging consciously. It's not about being overly restrictive, kind of that 80-20 rule, and choosing your indulgences mindfully. So it's not just about what we eat, but our pattern of eating. So here we want to keep the blood sugar stable. We want to stay steady, be focused and productive. And so not going long stretches without eating. For most people, that would be eating either a meal or a snack every 4 to 5 hours. And so finding again what works for you, if you need meals, snacks, etc. But consistency is what's key. Then I'd like to just touch briefly, because again, it connects to our overall topic for today's session, and that's inflammation in food. So what we choose to eat, or the things that may be left out of our eating plan, can affect inflammation at the cellular level. If we have, this looks different for everyone, but there are a lot of influences to the inflammation that happens internally. And so it's the body's response, to a lot of factors. And if we eat mindfully and focus on these wholesome foods we've been talking about, then we can reduce the amount of inflammation in the body. So probably no big surprise here that foods that are anti-inflammatory are like the ones you see on the right side. They're the wholesome foods, the vegetables, the fruits, the whole grains, the healthy fats. And then those pro-inflammatory foods are going to be our traditional, high fat, junk foods, etc. So it doesn't mean we can never have those, but that we would want to focus more on anti-inflammatory foods. You may or may not be familiar with Dr. Weil's anti-inflammatory food pyramid, which is what you see here. And basically what it is, along the lines of what we've been discussing already, is it could be an antidote to fighting inflammation with our fork. So it's essentially a cross, a blend between Mediterranean style eating, which has tons and tons of science behind it, as well as the most health promoting foods of the Asian culture. And it kind of brings those two together. And then this is really interesting too in terms of healthy aging. There's some research done called the blue zones, where researchers have identified where the people are living the longest, healthiest lives. And so they've identified in their research, similar to what we've been discussing, different foods across the many different cultures that are beneficial for supporting our immune system. I'm going to say there's no magic bullets. This is kind of like just establishing the foundation by including these types of foods in our eating plan to give us the best possible health promoting benefits. There were questions that came in about what can I do to, boost my immune system and so forth. So, again, like I said, there's no magic bullets, but here everything from ginger and garlic and other herbs and spices to beans and citrus fruits, chicken soup, that old fashioned, there's truth to it, there's science. A lot of these foods you see here, they're rich in different antioxidants, different vitamins that serve as really powerful antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory, we hear again. Even probiotic foods like yogurt and so forth with live active cultures are going to be supportive to our immune system. So again, reducing the likelihood that we would become ill or supporting us if we do become sick at any point. And so finally, again, as we wrap up, 1 or 2 more slides here to address the questions that came in. The nutrients that you see highlighted are found in a variety of foods. So again, if we take that food first approach, that if I get a cross-section of colorful fruits, vegetables, whole grains, I'm going to reiterate that again, that we can ideally get all of the nutrients we need to be the healthiest possible. The ones you see in bold are associated with either supporting our immune system cells or, again, serving as some type of immune, connected to our immunity and our immune system and supporting that in a variety of ways, including zinc, vitamin C, and many others that you see here. And you see the list continued on and on. So again, just strive for that balance, strive for that variety, and that would be the best foundation you can. So that's all I have for you today. If we can at all be service to you through programming for the community, through our services, then you are invited to reach out to us. Thank you. Stay well.
Well, thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate that. I must say, we were talking at the beginning that your family came from France, mine came from Belgium, as
Yes.
many people know. So where's chocolate on the list? I'm
Yes,
very
it's
disappointed.
there. And maybe it was a little tiny in the text, but it is on the anti-inflammatory
Okay,
pyramid.
I'm glad
I
to hear it.
promise.
That's good.
Dark
That's
chocolate.
good. Unfortunately, I think that might have been my breakfast this morning.
Oh,
Don't tell anyone.
No judgment.
And I do love that your stomach has no teeth. Slow
Okay,
down.
it's a good one. It's a good one
Thank
to
you very
remember.
much. Really,
My pleasure.
Really appreciate that, and hopefully everybody finds that very helpful this year. So. Well, I'm going to shift now, unfortunately, back to COVID. Boy, would I love to be having town halls where we hear things like that the whole time. And so I'm going to start talking about the situation in our community with COVID. As I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about vaccines, and then we're going to have Dirk Sossman talk about the science behind vaccines, as well as a little bit about therapy. And then Roberta Schwartz is going to come on virtually, actually, from outside the studio and talk about some of the operational challenges associated with vaccines delivery, and I'll be talking about some of that as well. So let me talk about where we are today. This is the Texas Medical Center dashboard for the number of new positive diagnoses across the greater Houston area. And as we talked about last time, we've already been seeing numbers that eclipsed what we saw in the summer, with two caveats. One being that the summer data was very delayed and lots of data got dumped into the system later. And the second caveat being there's way more testing happening today. With all of that being said, there's no doubt we are seeing levels at the highest we've been seeing throughout this pandemic right now. So let me show you our data. I always trust our data a lot because it's very real time. We can look at it very quickly. Remember, the bars, the blue bars, are the number of positive tests that we diagnose at anywhere within Houston Methodist on a given day. So if you look at that, you can see to the right end, we're not quite diagnosing as many people positive as we did this summer, but we are at the highest daily averages and the 7-day running averages that we've ever been at, other than about a 2-week period at the beginning, right at the end of June and into the first 12, 13 days of July. The good news is that 7-day running average has been a little bit level the last week. I'm watching that, hoping that that may be one of the early signals that maybe we're going to start seeing this flatten out, but far, far, far from convinced of that. The orange line is the percentage of tests we do that are positive. So the absolute peak number was right at the beginning of July, 28.5% on a 7-day rolling average that we saw back then. We hit 33% this time coming out of the holiday season. You see that's come down, and what I can't answer for you yet is that just artifact as a result of holidays, or is that we've turned a little bit of a corner, because we're still at really high numbers. The reason I say that is because remember, during the holiday period, people just don't want to come in and get tested, right? So people avoid getting tested. The sicker come in, the less sick don't come in. So it could be that we're just seeing a little artifact during that time that skewed it up a little bit. I don't know the answer to that yet, but the bottom line is still at record levels that we have seen throughout this pandemic. And so this is the net result in the hospital. So remember, the blue lines is total census across our hospitals. The dark orange line is the number of people in a regular medical surgical bed. The yellow line or gold line is the number of people in an ICU. And then the green line is an intermediate between the two. So what you see here is we are now at record levels of census across our system. This is the highest we have seen. Big time now in the med-surg, so that dark orange line, that's where it's residing. The glimmer of good news in this is the gold line is still well below our peak this summer. That's the ICUs, that's the hardest part. So that gives us some runway that we're glad we have when we look at some of the projections that are out there. You'll see this last few days, we had a little ditzel down, and kind of the last couple days have been a little slower rate of increase than they were, kind of in the couple weeks before, with very few breaks. It looks a hair like the beginning of that plateau last time, but we're far from ready to call that at this point. I'm crossing my fingers. I hope that's true. I think we may have a little farther to go, and I'll talk about some of that data in a couple of seconds. This is the same data from the Texas Medical Center. So on the top, you see the last 30 days, and then you see the whole arc of the pandemic on the bottom, and you see it changes color by month. And so in that kind of bright purple or whatever that is color on the right, that is now January, and you can see on aggregate across the TMC, just below levels we saw this summer. So on aggregate, not quite there, and we've just crossed that, as I talked about. So the net result is that we have now discharged over 10,000 people from our hospitals with this. On Christmas Day, we actually admitted our 10,000th individual, and you can see, just in a couple weeks since then, we are well past that, unfortunately. And sadly, if you look at the orange to the right, within the next couple of days, unfortunately and sadly, we will have probably our 1,000th individual succumb to the disease at one of our hospitals, which is a number. If you'd told me before this, I would have been, shocked and appalled. I'm obviously shocked and appalled now, but I would never have believed it could be that bad of a pandemic. And so for anyone who ever talks about and minimizing this, it is anything but minimized. And so let me show you a little bit of those data. So this is the tracking over the last number of years, I think it goes back to 2015, of the leading causes of death. So what you see is always in the United States, heart disease is the number one cause of death. And for any recent memory, heart disease has been number one and cancer has been number two. In that kind of brighter purple kind of color, you see then coming in last year, in the February, March, and then really March timeframe into April. And it quickly became largely concentrated, as everybody knows, in certain markets, particularly the Northeast. But it became the number one cause of death for a brief period of time, and then has solidly been the number three cause of death throughout the rest of the calendar year until November, when it actually became the number one cause of death again. Remember, there's always delay in reporting, so we don't have that. But deaths have gone up and up. The last time I talked to y'all, we were running averages nationally of a couple thousand, and I was talking about how concerned I was of getting to that level, and I think we were in the 220, 240,000 range. I can't remember exactly, of total deaths, and I was alarmed and potentially seeing 100,000 deaths a month. Here we are now, solidly 3,000 a day. Yesterday was 4,400 nationally. So we are seeing what we were worrying about. And so unfortunately, we have a time period here where we're going to continue to see very large numbers of deaths. We're at 381,000 now across the United States. So at the pace we're going, we're going to pass 500,000 by the time we hit March 1st, which is probably the earliest time we can hope that we might see vaccines really start to turn the tide of the pandemic. If you look in another way of looking at this, then on the left, you see a several year excess deaths graph from the CDC. So in the blue, you see the actual number of deaths reported. In the kind of line above that, that's the projected for each year based on the statistical modeling. So really a good couple of years of being a little less, and so having less, not excess, but minimal deaths underneath that number, but very clearly and very precipitously going up starting last year, and now consistently well above that every single reporting period since that time. Last couple of weeks there are always that are reported will come up because that's incomplete data that they have there. So I have no doubt those will continue to be up there. The last time we had any excess mortality was the 17-18 year. I didn't put that here because it just got too clunky on the slide, but you can see about a 3-week period at the peak of flu, which is not unusual in some flu seasons. We didn't have that in the last couple flu seasons, and now we're having that big time. On the right, you see the UK, which just reported that when they look at deaths compared to the last 5 years average deaths, so this is an annual number going back 80 years, 90 plus years. So the highest excess deaths they've seen in the UK since World War II. So there's really only one year period in that, and I think it's about a century actually, that we have on that graph there for the UK. Haven't seen that kind of analysis in the US, but gets your attention, it certainly does. So where's this going to go? I mean, obviously that's one of the key questions for us. Many models out there, the IHME has been used many times. None of these models are perfect by any stretch, nor is ours, and I'll show you ours in a minute. But what it shows nationally is that we probably are getting to peak and this is a Texas graph, in the not too distant future. Now, Houston is lagging the rest of Texas. Remember when I was talking to you before, we had El Paso and the Panhandle and other places really rip-roaring out of control. They've started to crest and come down, particularly El Paso, but we're still on the way up based on what I've been showing you so far. But the good news in this is I think there's some hope that we can really start to bring this curve down. This is our modeling. Now, this is the number of people diagnosed with COVID that very day. It doesn't count people who came in because of COVID but are 2-3 weeks in and don't need to be isolated anymore, and some other and numbers who are being worked up. So from an absolute census, and to tie it to the other slides I showed you, you can add anywhere from 50 for that first clarification, and then probably 70 or 80. So the bottom line is, in orange it shows what we model, and in blue it shows what we've been experiencing. So it's pretty accurate. For a while there, it was actually overcalling what we got, and then now things accelerated and it's been undercalling what we've got coming. It says we've got another, probably 50 to 70 census minimum. I think it may be undercalling it, I don't know. But it also says that in a couple weeks, we hope to be cresting. Now, this had a lot of assumptions that as we got to sort of this critical mass and people in the community were seeing all the, the press about hospitals being busy and all the numbers, that behavior would start to change. It assumed that kind of after we got through the holiday period, behaviors would really start to change, kind of whether it's New Year's resolutions or whether it's just seeing what happened or getting some of the things that people got out of their system over the holiday period. So it's a lot of assumptions baked into this. I'm hoping it's correct. And the good news with vaccines is once we do crest, we should hopefully, barring some God-foreseen thing like a mutation that changes the efficacy of the vaccine, we should see a curve that starts to come down and keeps coming down. It's going to take a long time, but keeps coming down. But remember, in July, we took about 2 months to get from those horrible, nasty peaks without a vaccine, just with community measures, to about, we went from 750-ish down to 134 by mid-September. So, you can get a lot without vaccines. Layer vaccines on this could get a lot better. Now, from that date forward, we've been growing, but we need to get the vaccines implemented, and we'll talk about those briefly. Before we get to that, I want to remind everybody about the monoclonal antibodies. Dr. Sossaman will talk about some of the science behind this briefly. But I just wanted to show you this and really honestly brag on the teams who have been working their tails off to get this done. This is extraordinarily complicated. There's article after article after article around the country about how difficult this has been and how these are going unused. I can't find anywhere in the United States outside of the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic that has a program even anywhere in our realm right now. We're giving on peak days 70, 75. We're probably averaging 55, 60 a day. We've done around 1,600 plus of these, and we're seeing really great results. I'll leave those to Dr. Sossaman to talk about those. Remember, though, if you are 65 and up and get diagnosed, if you are 55 to 64 and you have heart disease and lung disease, or if you are any age with obesity with a body mass index of greater than 35, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, immunological disorders, you should be asking your physicians, should I get this? And we can get you in and scheduled. And in fact, we've had this incredibly successful program. It has really caught the state's eye. I'm in constant communication, literally almost every day with folks at the state about this and about vaccines. We have really served our region very, very well. And actually, if I don't have it here, but if I expanded out the map, I can show you a few people from the corners of our state, and even a few who've come from around the country, not really traveling here to get it, but they're here, they get sick, and they get it. So we have really done our share in serving the community with this. The great thing since the last time we talked that happened is we began to get vaccines in. These are the first five people who got vaccine at Houston Methodist. You're chatting with one of them, and that's on the left. That's Dr. Drews, who was number one in our institution to get this. We have up there the leader of our emergency rooms, and Johnny Leonard. We have Pablo Vasquez, who headed up all of our highly infectious disease unit, and we have two of our ICU nurses. So we really purposely picked some people at the really pointy edge of the sword, and who could role model and help others with coming and deciding to get their vaccine. So let me talk a little bit about the distribution now. This is complicated. Obviously, a lot of information in the press. You're frustrated, we're frustrated, everybody's frustrated. So let's start with the good news. The good news is 27 plus million doses have gotten out to states. You can see sort of the density of that in the map there. And you're getting into the 9 plus million people who have been vaccinated. I'll make two caveats with that. The data systems across all of the states, best I can tell, are lousy. And I think there's a lag in reporting. And then two is there are some places where vaccine has gone and has been slow to get in arms. We are not one of those, and I will tell you about that a little bit more. On the good end for us as Texans, we have vaccinated essentially as much as anybody out there. On the bad news, look at us versus California. We've gotten a lot less vaccine than California. And so what you end up seeing is while we're right up there at the top in terms of doses administered, So we're getting them in arms in Texas. And of course, we have a bigger population than most states. We are actually almost at the bottom of the vaccines that have come into our state, yet we're in the kind of upper 20% of vaccines administered. So I'd like to see that better as a state, but it's hardly that we're getting less because we're doing less. And I don't understand this issue. This is a federal allocation issue, and you're going to hear that repeated from me, that the main issue you're seeing with vaccines right now is we're not getting enough from the federal government into the states and therefore to the rest. I'm working daily with state officials. I will tell you, they've been amazing to work with, as have county and city people that we're working with. I can't say enough good things about all of them, as how collaborative everybody's been, and everybody just wants to get vaccines as quickly as possible. But we're just not getting enough supply, and I'll talk some more about that in a second. This is our distribution across Houston Methodist. So in the blue, you see the numbers of doses we've given each and every day. It tailed off towards the end of the year a little bit, initially because they weren't letting us go past 1A. And so when you're rigid and can't go to other groups, you can't sometimes find enough in that group. There were more who wanted it, but they're sort of spread out. Once they gave us the green light to do that, we rapidly got some people in over the last week and really bumped our numbers appropriately. What you've now see in the last 10 days or so is in orange. That's now really mainly our employees and physicians, but soon to be others, getting their second doses as well as the first doses we've been administering. We are getting vaccine in arm very quickly. I literally, and my team literally bites our nails every week trying to see if we're going to get enough vaccine to get us through to the next week without having to cancel appointments, and then to start the whole process again. We've got people scheduled for weeks out, so we are always worried, are we going to get enough vaccine in? So let me show you what's happened with the greater Houston area. So this is the vaccine distribution through the first 5 weeks in the greater Houston area. So you see in the first week, in blue, those are the Texas Medical Center institutions as a whole. You see in blue, almost everything came to the hospitals, which is the way it was designed. It was only Pfizer. We're among the only ones who have that capability, and the goal was get healthcare workers moving, right? Then you started to see other groupings here get vaccine, and you saw the numbers come up dramatically, but they've come down each week. And this week, we're talking 30,000 vaccines coming into the greater Houston area for 7.2 million people. So right there, as you think about queues and waits and frustration and everything else, that is the root cause of why it is so challenging right now, because there's just not enough vaccine to go around, even with the people, I don't care what risk group you take, there's not enough vaccine to go around as you look at that. Let me give you an idea of our Houston Methodist numbers. This is our supply each week. And what you see is kind of getting our fair share essentially of the TMC data numbers. And then the state started taking note, and we'd be talking with them frequently on the phone because we're all talking about it and making sure they have accurate numbers. And they're looking at that saying, okay, you guys are executing, you're getting vaccine in, and we're not seeing that broadly everywhere. And in week 4, we went up to over 50% of the vaccines distributed to Texas Medical Center hospitals went to Houston Methodist. This then led to what I'll talk about in a second, which is the vaccine hubs. And the result of that is we're getting 91% of the Texas Medical Center supply this week at Houston Methodist. This is what's happened across the Texas Medical Center. They display their data a little differently. So the top number is the number of doses given. The bottom left number is the number of people who have only received a first dose, and the bottom right number is the people who have received both a first dose and a second dose. So to get to the total, you have to multiply that second box by 2. These are our Houston Methodist numbers looked at in a similar way. The way I tend to look at it really is, how many people have we gotten vaccines started with? We have done 41,122. That's higher than the chart I was showing you before, because that chart was a day in arrears because we had to turn it in, last night, and we just got our yesterday data this morning. So 41,122 people have received a first dose. We've done 11,962 second doses. So we have given 53,000 vaccines. That's a Herculean task. I mean, that is an incredible task. I'm so proud of what our teams have been able to do. And so the result of that was we were designated by the state as one of their 28 sites in the state, one of 3 in the greater Houston area. I think the philosophy of this from their standpoint is, look, the supply has been shrinking. We're not getting it in fast enough. Some places around the state are struggling with getting it in fast enough. Let's pick the ones who have shown a track record of getting it in quickly, because we know when we give them the supply this week with limited supply, they're going to all get it in this week. And then let's let the others catch up. And so I think that's what you're going to see. So you're actually going to, in strange ways, you'll see a big uptick, I think, in the number of people vaccinated in the state right now, as all those other places keep working through their logistics, and as these other institutions that have been really getting it in quickly also continue to push in. So we got 10,725 doses as a mass site. We got a 300 at our Woodlands Hospital, so we got a little over 11,000 doses. We got Pfizer, so actually we can apply all but the last 300. So actually we can get 6 per vial, so it's actually a little more than that. The city got 8,000, the county got 8,000, and then there, collectively there were a couple thousand. We were 300 of those that went to small institutions around the community. This comes with a lot of expectations from the state. They expect us to open up our process past just our patient population, which we have done. We did an open sign up the other day. Roberto will talk about that, but we had to close it after we had 20,000 people already signing up, asking for an appointment, and then we work to then do invitations based on risk groups. We continue to invite our patients as well, and using risk group as well. And we are being very purposeful about getting to communities that are underserved, communities that have been hard hit by COVID throughout. And that is, underlined and in bold in the requirements we have from the state. And of course, we were already doing that, but we have leaned into that even more. Let me show you the challenge. This is the city of Houston. So this TMC has been doing a lot of analysis, kind of knitting together everybody and really trying to flip this and go to the state and say, once you have the supply, here's how the whole community will work together. And it's really a great process between city, county, pharmacies, all the TMC institutions. So once we get through this kind of state period and supply ramps up, I am confident that we have the infrastructure as a community to get vaccinated and get vaccinated quickly. The issue is supply right now. So you see we have about 7.2 million people, 7.1 plus million people or so in the greater Houston area. Vaccines are only authorized, Pfizer's authorized 16 and up, Moderna's authorized 18 and up. So in their analysis, they took everybody under 18. You actually could shrink that number a little. And then they said, okay, if you need to get to 80%, which may be on the high end, but if you need to get 80% to get to herd immunity, and you see that dashed line, that number is actually higher than the adult population in the greater Houston area. So to really truly get to that, you'd have to either have enough kids infected or to add to that, get every adult vaccinated, or you have to move into kids. And you'll ask questions about it, I know, but we think the older kids, 12 to 15, 3-4 months out from the studies, I'm guessing. And then the next group, which is like a 5 to 11, they're talking perhaps before school gets in session, but we don't know that as a fact. And then at the right, you see the number of people 65 and up versus the rest of the population. So, it's an achievable number if we focus on 65 and up. But remember, the first few 100,000 vaccines are really targeted to 1A, which is healthcare workers, fire, police, ambulance, et cetera, et cetera. There's a very large number of that in the community. We're very lucky to be in Texas, where we got authorization to start with patients because the 1As, weren't all running simultaneously to the vaccine, because most states have not even begun doing any significant number of people outside of that group. So this is the thing to remember. Look at those numbers, and cumulatively through week 5, what has now arrived, just under 300,000 first doses, these are first dose vaccinations, have arrived to the city of Houston. And we have, almost 900,000 or something like that, 65 and up. That's after all those 1As. And we have a population we need to vaccinate that's well over 5 million. You're talking about, very small percentages right now, which is the fundamental challenge that we're all facing. We've also looked through the TMC at, okay, what does it look like? And if you look at the supply that's come into our region so far, and you just, spread that out, it's a couple years to get everybody vaccinated. Obviously, that's not acceptable, but that's a supply chain issue coming from the feds. Now remember, we do think there'll be another vaccine, and Dirk will talk about that, or maybe more than one vaccine coming in. So there's lots of things happening positively that didn't assume that just said run rate. To do 180 days, which is mid-year, which is faster than Fauci talks about. He talks about 9 months, to a herd immunity level like I was showing you, which is mostly a herd immunity level, with the caveat being about the children and everything else. But let's just say 80% of the adult population. That can be done in 180 days with 52,000 vaccinations a day. That's not 52,000 first doses. That's 52,000 shots a day. We're doing 4,500 at Houston Methodist right now, and we could triple that Monday. I mean, we could already triple it, but we could be there Monday if we had the vaccine supply, and that's first and second doses total. So, I mean, we're already almost 8% of the solution, just us, but we could be 10, 12, 13%, just Houston Methodist. So then bring in other TMC colleagues, bring in a very distributed pharmacy network, the city and county with big events and really targeting some populations that need travel to get to them. And I mean, you need mobile clinics and many, many other things. This can be done. We're absolutely certain of it. It's just a matter of getting the vaccine into the community. So with that, I'll wrap things up. I'm going to turn to Dr. Saussman, who's going to talk about the science behind this and why we all should want to get the vaccine when it is our turn. And then we're going to bring Dr. Schwartz, Roberta Schwartz, to talk about some logistics. And then we'll have a very robust Q&A session today as well around many of your questions about vaccines. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome to everyone. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can leverage the immune system to fight COVID. Let's just remember very briefly, if you've been at previous town halls, you've seen this slide before. Our immune system works, our native immune system that's incorporated in our bodies works by recognizing an antigen or a foreign substance. This very primitive, relatively nonspecific innate immune system processes it, presents it to the more highly evolved, more precise, more specific adaptive immune system that then can deploy two different sets of weapons against the invader. First, antibodies that will coat it, render it harmless, and facilitate its clearance from the body. And secondly, specialized cells that will kill the cells that are infected by the virus. And then we develop this immune memory so that we can recognize promptly that invader if we see it again and mount a spirited defense rapidly. And that last bit is really what vaccines do for us. They give us a head start in fighting a foreign invader. Now, in the red box on the left-hand side, let me point out a different kind of immune strategy, which is called passive immunity. And that is the convalescent plasma, the monoclonal antibodies, and something called hyperimmune globulin, where we can take antibodies that have been mounted by a recovered patient or generated in the laboratory and use those in place of our own antibodies, again, to fight the virus. So let's talk about antibody treatments. First, just a brief update on the convalescent plasma therapy that was really done first here at Houston Methodist. Our studies were not randomized controlled trials. At the time, it was not deemed ethical to have a placebo group in this treatment. But Dr. Salazar in our pathology department, our blood bank, has done, I think, a very, very elegant set of retrospective adjustments in cohort studies. And his data showed that if you give high titer convalescent plasma, very potent plasma, and if you give it early in the course of the disease, you can reduce the mortality at 28 days by about 60%. This has been very controversial. The White House and the NIH have fought about it. Different scientists have disputed it. There are pros, there are cons. The best comparable randomized placebo-controlled trial, that's the gold standard of clinical trials, was just published in the New England Journal. Very similar to Salazar's study design, early treatments with high titer plasma these people found about a 50% reduction in mortality. So I think a very good confirmation of the data that was generated at Houston Methodist. That data led to an interest in monoclonal antibodies, which very briefly are just very highly selected, super potent, super specific antibodies that are gleaned from a soup of different kinds of antibodies, produced and really manufactured in the laboratory and then administered as if they were a drug. What has been found in early or mild COVID-19 is again about a 60 to 65% reduction in hospitalization or progression to severe disease. The news is a lot less good once the disease has become severe or folks have been admitted to the hospital. The ability of these antibodies to affect the course of the disease then appears to be much less. And this kind of makes sense because the early phase of COVID-19 is the viral replication and viremia phase. The later complications seem to be, at least in large measure, related to a dysregulated immune response, which these antibodies would not affect. So these have been approved by the FDA for emergency use in mild to moderate COVID-19. The qualifications for getting these are a positive test for COVID and a high risk for progression. And the high risk is defined as people who meet at least one of the following, which is a body mass index of greater than 35, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, immunosuppression for any reason, or greater than 65 years of age. Age greater than 55 and cardiovascular disease or hypertension or chronic respiratory disease. So if you have a positive test, if you are starting to feel mildly ill and you fall into one of these groups, strongly urge you to get this treatment. It really does help. As Mark Boom showed, we have treated a lot of people. We've had 0 mortalities on follow-up, no severe reactions, and only 4% went on to hospitalization. So vaccines are obviously the story of the moment. There are 3 approved vaccines in the Western world, the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and in the United Kingdom also the AstraZeneca vaccine. I'm going to talk about the Pfizer and Moderna almost interchangeably because they're very, very equivalent. AstraZeneca is a little different in its technology and also in its results. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines generate a very, very strong antibody response as well as cell-mediated immunity. They are a messenger RNA technology. And although we don't know whether they will prevent transmission in humans, their efficacy for preventing severe disease and for preventing disease is fantastic. This is about as good as it gets with a vaccine. As far as the transmission issue, which a lot of people are talking about, although it may seem counterintuitive, it is possible for a vaccine to be strong enough to prevent you from getting sick, but not strong enough to prevent you from getting infected. And the best data here is in monkeys. And whatever you may think about your in-laws, monkeys are not humans, and so we can't rely on this data for human clinical use. But the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines absolutely created what is called sterilizing immunity. They gave monkeys the vaccine. They then challenged them by spraying COVID into their noses. And the COVID was not able to reproduce and survive. It was not found in their nasal secretions. The AstraZeneca vaccine prevented the monkeys from getting sick, but live virus could be recovered from their secretions. And so the possibility of transmission remains alive. And in fact, when this was studied in human beings, although the efficacy of the vaccine for preventing disease was anywhere from 60 to 90%, with an average of about 70%, and it prevented severe disease in 100%, it prevented transmission in only 27%. We don't know that data for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. I would expect it to be better, but this is not something you want to fool around with. So until we have that data, we have to assume that even if you've been vaccinated, you can transmit this virus to others. The technology for the RNA vaccines, I think we've gone over before, just very briefly. We take the genetic sequence for the spike protein of the virus. It's coded into messenger RNA, which is kind of like a biological software instruction that instructs your body's cells to produce this protein. It's coated with a little lipid particle to protect it and help it deliver into your cells. Once it gets into your cells, it instructs the material in your cells that makes proteins to produce the spike protein of the virus. Now, one of the misinformations about this is, if it gets into your cell, can't it get into your DNA and change your genes? No. Number one, it doesn't go into the nucleus of your cell where your DNA resides. Number two, the flow of genetic information is from DNA to RNA, not the other way. And number three, this messenger RNA is a very unstable compound. Although these have been modified slightly to try to make them last longer in the body, they probably do not persist for more than about a day. So your body produces these proteins, and then your immune system kicks into action and develops immunity to it, and that's how it works. Safety. Lots of talk about safety. Lots of folks are afraid about, will it kill me? Will it make me a hybridoma? Are there, what about the allergic reactions? Is it safe in pregnancy? Is it safe in children? Now, a lot of these answers we don't know very well. We know that in about 40,000 people in clinical trials, it was very safe in people of 18 to about 80, including people who had other kinds of illnesses. The one group that was excluded from these trials is people who had had anaphylactic severe allergic reactions to vaccines in the past. But if you look at the safety overview, and I'm just showing the Pfizer here to be quick, there were mild reactions at the injection site in a large majority of vaccinated people. A lot of people had some kind of systemic influence, but serious reactions were pretty unusual. And in fact, there were serious reactions in the placebo group too, which only got salt water, so go figure. Allergic reactions in the vaccine group were very, very slightly more than in the placebo group. Actually, the people who died was more in the placebo group than the vaccine group. None of these deaths were deemed related to the vaccination. It's just a fact that when you follow large numbers of human beings, some of them are going to get sick and some of them are going to die. Looking at the quote-unquote reactogenic effects, which are, as I said, they're a feature, not a bug. They're expected. Some people get fever. Some people get fatigue. This happened to me when I got vaccinated. I I felt fine, but I had, man, the best night's sleep I've had in months. And I don't know if it was, just relief at getting vaccinated or some fatigue, but my muscle aches, chills, joint pains, needing to take Tylenol or Motrin, these are very common, should not dissuade anybody from getting vaccinated. They're treatable with Tylenol or Motrin, and they are not a sign of illness or a bad reaction. It's your immune system swinging into gear, basically. The one rare thing that we've seen in real life that was not seen in the trials was severe allergic reactions, anaphylaxis or anaphylactoid reactions. These have been seen in about 21 cases in the first 2 million vaccinations, so about 1 in 100,000. That's more than the flu vaccine, which is about 1 in a million. Good news is nobody has died from one of these. They're very treatable with an EpiPen. They typically occur within the first 15 to 30 minutes. And so if you hang around the vaccination site where you can be treated, you're quite safe. In terms of precautions, most people who had these reactions had a history of allergies, but that really doesn't help us because about 20% of the population has a history of allergies. About a third of the people who had anaphylaxis had a history of anaphylaxis in the past. Of the 7 people of those 21, 2 to a vaccine. Certainly, if you had an anaphylactic reaction to the first dose, or if you know you are allergic to a component of the vaccine, we would not vaccinate you. But this is going to be a very, very small number of people. The one place where Houston Methodist's protocols differ and we're more conservative, where we differ from the CDC recommendations, is that red box. If you've had a history of a severe allergic reaction to any vaccine, we will not vaccinate you. We consider that a contraindication. The CDC actually will allow you to be vaccinated with a 30-minute observation period. Our feeling is that since the clinical trials excluded people from this, we would like to wait and see what the real life experience is before we start vaccinating folks in this group. But again, this is a very small number of people. It's basically 1 in a million. Risk benefit, these numbers are just kind of rough orders of magnitude, back of the envelope numbers, so don't take them, don't put them in your spreadsheet. But there's a lot of focus in the media and among some people that we know about, oh my God, this vaccine can't possibly be safe. It was developed so fast, they're experimenting on us. What about this? What about that? Let's put this in proportion. If you get vaccinated, and these are COVID-19 vaccination numbers, you're going to be inconvenienced. You have about a 50-50 chance of being inconvenienced. You might wake up the night after you get vaccinated with chills and, have to take Tylenol and have a bad night's sleep. You have a 1 in 100,000 chance of an anaphylactic reaction, which, as I said, is treatable, very upsetting, very serious, but treatable. Let's guess that there might be a 1 in a million chance of some other, severe side effect that we have not seen yet, but none have been seen yet. And let's guess that maybe there's a 1 in 10 million chance of dying. There's been no proven connection between a COVID vaccination and a death yet in America. So those are the kind of risks that you're running. If you don't get vaccinated and you live in America, you heard the updated numbers from Mark. Over 350,000 people have died. In a population of 330 million, that's a 1 in 1,000 chance of death. So on the one hand, 1 in 100,000 chance that you might have a severe reaction that needs treatment. On the other hand, 100 times that risk of dying. I don't think this is a difficult decision at all. And we're not only talking about dying, we're talking about a 1% chance of anybody in America ending up in the hospital with COVID. You've also heard about the long COVID, the fatigue, the heart disease, the stroke complications. In over 1% of people. This is why we're having these town halls. This is why we're bending ourselves over backwards to vaccinate people. Really, if you have friends who are worried about this, I mean, I'm happy to talk to them. Okay, very quickly, the second wave, probably the next one that's going to be approved would be the J&J vaccine. They claim they'll have results in a couple of weeks. It will not happen in January because the FDA advisory panel meetings for January have all been canceled, but probably in February, the J&J vaccine will be reviewed. A single-dose vaccine, which only needs to be refrigerated. Let's hope that it works. A lot of questions came in about the viral mutations. And let me just say, these do happen. COVID-19 mutates less rapidly than the flu by about a factor of 3. These mutants can certainly improve the transmissibility of the virus. Here, for example, is the time course over the summer of one particular mutant, the D614G in Houston. It went from being almost not present to being the majority strain. And the same thing has happened in the United Kingdom with this B117 variant. These will change the spike protein a little bit to make it open up better and latch onto your cells better. But importantly, it does not mean that it's going to be more lethal or harder to treat. I won't go through all this in detail, but let me just point out that that D614G mutant, which was very much more transmissible, actually later data shows may be more susceptible to antibody treatments than the strain that it replaced. So summaries about mutants, what could go wrong. Viral mutations are a normal thing. They happen all the time. They are then subjected to selective pressure and they evolve. And when we get more people in the population who are immune, very likely they will evolve in such a way to escape the monoclonal antibodies and the vaccines. This is not going to happen overnight. It's probably going to take the accumulation of many, many mutations in the virus. The good news is that the RNA vaccines can be updated in, the manufacturers say, literally about 6 weeks, because all they have to change is the sequence of the messenger RNA payload of the vaccine. So the other point is that transmissibility and lethality are not necessarily connected in the mutation world. Now, obviously, we don't want a more transmissible strain here in Houston, because any case of COVID-19 has the possibility of going bad, so, the fewer we have, the better. And I know this sounds like a broken record, but the best defense that you have against a highly transmissible, contagious virus is to double down on your masking, your social distancing, and your hand washing. And for your convenience, when they distribute these slides, I've included something on how to wear a face mask, how to wash your hands, and how to socially distance. I know you guys have been doing a great job of this, but if you want to pass this out to your kids and your friends, please do that. So I think the news on the scientific front continues to be good. As Mark said, you've got to temper it with recognition of the huge problem that we're facing in logistics, but we're on track, I think.
Well, thank you, Dirk. Certainly more encouraging news even than last time about vaccines. So it's great to see, and it's great to see the monoclonal antibodies really grabbing hold. I will say Houston Methodist gave the first infusion of convalescent plasma in the United States, and very early our people did some of the early studies that said, hey, we think this is working, and it's nice to see that continue to get borne out. And that then led to the monoclonals, which we are seeing such a great experience. So it's sort of almost poetic that we're leading the way with that right now. So thank you for all that you and colleagues in the Academic Institute have done to make that a reality. So I'm going to turn things over now to Dr. Roberta Schwartz, who is virtually joining us. Dr. Schwartz, as many of you know, is our Executive Vice President running the Maine Hospital. She's also our Chief Innovation Officer for the system. And I will say I will hold her up to any operations executive anywhere on the planet as the best operations executive out there. She deserves a lot of kudos. Her teams right now are managing the highest surge we've seen, doing more monoclonal antibody than anybody, which is huge, and spending inordinate amounts of their time right now figuring out vaccine logistics, as you know, and leading the way around the country with that as well. Roberta, I know even now with all those people in-house, you spend probably the majority of your time on the vaccine side of things, as do many of us. So I want to give her my round of applause because she's really a true hero of this pandemic. And then Roberta, why don't you share with us, and I think I'm going to be controlling your slides here, so just let me know when you need me to advance.
Fantastic. I cannot thank you enough this morning for both the time and your patience. I know this is very hard to be patient when so many people would like the vaccine right now, today. And I know this distribution plan is very difficult. So let's go to the first slide and kind of show you day zero. This is the first arrival of those vaccines into our facility. These were the first vaccines for the healthcare workers. And for those of you who haven't gone out to the website, to the right is Bob Kidd blessing the first set of vaccines that came into the facility. The prayer was absolutely incredibly meaningful. And I would encourage you to go to our Facebook site and take a look. It was such an amazing day. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see those first shots being given. And you've already heard from Dr. Drews. You heard to the right from Dr. Massoud many times. This is a group of our intensivists getting their vaccines. Dr. David Bernard, who you've heard from, and Johnny Leonard, who's the head of our emergency room. So such an incredible group. We did about 200 our first day while we were kind of slow rolling it. Within the next 5 days, we vaccinated over 10,000 of our frontline workers, as well as started to do some of the EMS community. At this point, as you've seen from Mark, we have done over 40,000 vaccines, which is really an incredible feat. If you look at the next slide, you'll see all of the places we are doing those vaccines. And quite honestly, I will tell you, we have every intention of having these vaccines in our primary care offices and in many more sites. As we recognize the complexity of making sure that we were using every last drop of vaccine, as well as the complexity of monitoring people, we decided that we were going to stay in hubs. We are just not ready yet to take this vaccine out into a variety of different offices, and you will see us staying at hub locations for the moment. And I would say to you, for the moment means months into our future. We're starting to pilot a little bit with some smaller sites, but we are not ready to take that to the mainstream. So these are the sites you're going to see us at the main hospital. The only difference is our hub for the main hospital will move right up the street to the Josie Roberts building. Next slide will show you the difference between what the federal guidelines are and the state guidelines are for vaccination right now. And this will show you, as you listen to the news, you need to recognize that every single state is doing this just a little bit differently. So as you look at each state, the federal guidelines are to the left. They start with healthcare workers, they go to essential workers, and then they go to patients. Texas, there was a little bit of a difference, as Dr. Boom has mentioned, that it was healthcare workers, and then we kind of flipped right down to those patients, and that was an important transition for us. Many states haven't given out their full vaccine because finding all of those people in 1A and figuring out who are the essential workers isn't the easiest thing in the world. And then you hold vaccine to get it to the right people rather than quickly get it in arms. So I give a lot of kudos and credit to the state of Texas and to the medical community working with them who pushed hard to kind of move right to our patient population. So if you go to the next slide, the vaccination process, you think it's super easy, like the flu, right? You get the vaccine out, you draw it up, you stick it in an arm, you're done. But there are a lot of differences between the flu vaccine and any other vaccine and the COVID vaccine. First is the vaccine supply. And right now, it is incredibly limited. And when I say incredibly, if you look at 30,000 vaccines a week, which is what came into Harris County this week, if you take that times the population, it's really going to take you about 2 years to get through the population. So obviously, we need a lot more vaccine supply. The second one is that it needs to get in the arms with a vaccinator who needs to document it in a computer, who needs to schedule your next one and make sure that you come back. And then you have to have that patient demand. And while that seems overwhelming for all of you who know that you want the vaccine, at some point towards the fall, we're going to switch from those people who want it to working on those people who need it, but don't necessarily want it. So it's one of those challenges that you definitely have to get to that herd immunity. Now, let me walk through these stages for you. And we're going to pull up the next slide, and then we're going to kind of roll through some media here. So 1A is very clear. 1A is healthcare workers, and it includes the first responders. So when people say, I see somebody younger in line, they're not really 75 and above. They are likely somebody who's in a 1A category who we are required to enroll first. And that is a large swath of people across the United States that was expected to be 20 million people. So that healthcare worker is a broad category that we are still working on. When you go to 1B, then as we pull it up, if you pull up the next set of media and press return again, we are scheduling patients above 75. That is being scheduled right now. Now, what we did was take a look into our database. We are 20% of the market, even more when you think about the patients who have touched us. So when we looked in just our database alone, there were over 120,000 people that were 75 and above that we touched. And that had, someone may have just touched us for a lab or an x-ray or had something sent to us, but it was 120,000 people. With the vaccine supply, that is taking us through the month of February to schedule those individuals. That takes us right into the beginning of February. With a little more vaccine and being a vaccine hub, we began to schedule the first of the patients that are 65. With, I know Dr. Boom mentioned the fact that we opened up a public site because the state required us not just to look in our database, and 65 and above, our database has 550,000 people in it, 550,000, so that's not a small group. But the state asked us to open up a public site just to make sure that people had the opportunity to register. Within 12 hours, we had over 18,000 people register on that site, and we did pull it down because the amount of vaccine we have is very limited, and we didn't want people to set an expectation that we were going to be able to get to them very quickly. So it went up and it came down as soon as we knew that we were going to fill those appointments. Our vaccine hub, as you look at that then, is going to start to vaccinate the first of the people in that 65 plus category, and that begins this weekend. Us doing many more people in that category will require that we get incremental vaccine supply. And so Dr. Boom continues to work with the state on a very routine basis for getting that vaccine to not only us, but pharmacies and supermarkets and other people who can help with this vaccination process. Then there's a larger group, which is the 1B part 3, which is 60 and above. and 16 and above with a medical condition. There are many sites that are doing that 1B, Part 3 right now. And I do appreciate that there are people who would like us to begin that category immediately. But if you think about the fact that we still have 75 plus, and we still have 550,000 people in the 65 plus, we think it's more responsible for us to just focus on these two groups right now to be able to fill our slots. So I think you'll see us focusing in these two areas for at least the next few months, unless there's a lot more supply of vaccine. So if we go on to the next site, I'm just going to show you that we have worked with our Center for Innovation and our technology to make the best use of all different technologies to have all of this work done electronically. So you will be contacted now that everything is live through a technology called CareSense. You will be doing your consents through the CareSense, and we will keep in touch with you to see whether or not you have any symptoms that we need to track on. Appointments are made by a system called Blockit. So these are some screenshots of what you will see. If you go to the next slide, this was the public site that we had up. Now, I anticipate that we will be putting up and down this public site as we get supply of vaccine. Hopefully, eventually, it will be up permanently. But for the moment, I would guess that you're going to see it go up probably once a week for a short period of time until slots are filled, and then it will come back down. This is a state requirement that we put up this front end site. And so we will be working on that front end site weekly. We also had the opportunity this week to work with 3 of our FQHC, federally qualified healthcare centers, to pull in some of their lists to make sure that we were getting to both a geographically and economically diverse population to make sure that we had the vaccine into many different arms. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to remind everybody that we do have the symptom tracker. This was one from yesterday that we pulled off. You probably, with Dr. Boom, may have seen the one from today. So this tracks how many vaccines we have gotten into arms, and we are incredibly excited about all the work that we have done. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Boom, and I'm happy to continue to answer questions.
Thank you, Roberta. Again, kudos on an amazing job. I want to highlight, a couple of things that that you mentioned there. One is we've been very careful working with our clinical experts to focus on the highest risk population. We feel our societal obligation is to get to people where we can turn down death and suffering the fastest. And that's why we chose to go to 75 and up, and why we're starting to open up slowly there. Others have chosen to go to the entire 1B population. That's obviously their prerogative, but I don't think, honestly, that is the best way to go. Our goal is to stop people from dying from this disease, and then our next goal is to turn this pandemic down and get back to normal. And I'm very confident our approach is the right way to go. The other thing I want to urge, really, across this whole thing, and that's that perfection is the enemy of the good. And so this was something that for us, for example, happened right after Christmas, where we were advocating very loudly with the state, saying, you got to let us do 1Bs. Don't hold us just to 1As, because it's going to sit too long. And to their credit, they listened and they made it happen, and it's changed what's happening in our state dramatically. What I have heard, and I chair a group of about 35 large system CEOs. We meet regularly. We did on Friday, and as we all talked about vaccine, with the exception of a couple other states that are similar to Texas, I heard over and over and over again that they were sitting on vaccine in their freezers because their states were too bureaucratic, not giving them that green light, and literally very punitive if they went past that. And again, our goal is to go as fast as we possibly can. We're going to do it as well as we can, as fairly as we can, as equitably as we can, as risk-based as we can. But we will push through that very rapidly. The primary care office side, I think, what Dr. Sussman talked about it. When we get the J&J vaccine and it's in large supply, and it's in a regular refrigerator and it's one dose only, you can see things really speed up a lot for all of the community. And that's the kind of thing that could be in every primary care office across the city. It's easy for pharmacies, et cetera. So I do continue to hope that we see that approved by the end of February, perhaps, Dr. Sossman, if hopefully. And that in 6-8 weeks we may see a whole nother actor coming in that's actually easier to administer. Is that a fair hope?
If all goes well, it could be approved in February. The bad news part is that they seem to be having some delays in manufacturing, so you're probably looking for it in March.
Okay. Well, we're going to cross our fingers on that and obviously look to see the others continue to enhance and supply. So we have tons of questions, and if you'll bear with us, I think this is an important enough topic. I'm going to let today go on a little long, just warning you now that we're going to try and get through these cases. Or these questions, because you have so many and you're asking wonderful questions, and I want to make sure we have clarity. So I'll take the first one, which is people asking, okay, if we got pretty high mask utilization, why are we seeing this surge? The answer is multifactorial. First off, we don't have that high of a mask utilization, number one. Number two, I've said this over and over again, this is much less about structured environments, like coming to a hospital and you're in masks, or kids going to school, or going to your work environment, or shopping at the grocery store. That's not to say those all don't have some issues at times. The big issue is outside of that, when people let their guards down. I think the holiday season's going to be the proof of that when we see what's been happening here. And I oftentimes get the Monday morning call that says, hey, so and so was at such and such, and then we end up arranging 25 different tests that morning. So back to the hunker down right now, do the things that matter and don't do the things that can be safely delayed right now. We can get over this hump, start this accelerating down, and then have vaccines be kicking in. All right, so Dr. Sossman, I'm going to go through a couple really quickly here because I want to get to a lot of these. So this is the question of basically, if I had COVID, how long is it going to protect me, and should I get a vaccine anyway, basically?
You're probably going to be protected from reinfection for at least a few months. The problem being that people's antibody responses are not totally uniform. So we recommend that if you have had COVID, you still get vaccinated. If you have an active case of COVID, you get vaccinated after your symptoms go away, and you exit the quarantine period.
And if you were sick enough to be in the hospital, get convalescent plasma, it's 90 days after.
That's correct. If you got convalescent plasma or a monoclonal antibody treatment, you can wait 90 days because you'll be protected for 90 days. And also, you don't want it to interfere with the antigen from the vaccine.
Okay, so several questions here about getting the vaccine. When are you exactly considered protected? You didn't show the curve, for example. Maybe you could talk about that curve of protection. And then you talked a lot already about the difference between infection and disease. So I don't think we need to go back through that, but at least talk about that, and a little bit about why do some people not convert? Why are there still anybody who get sick if even vaccinated? So.
Okay, so a few questions in there. One is when are you protected? And let's remember these are only 95%. So keep masking to protect yourself as well as to protect others. There is some degree of protection about 10 to 14 days after you get the first dose. What we don't know is how good it is really, because it's a small number of people. We also don't know how long it lasts. So real important for you to get that second dose. We don't know if you can mix and match. So we are telling people if you get Pfizer the first time, you get Pfizer the second time. If you get Moderna the first time, you get Moderna the second time. We can provide those vaccines. There's no reason to go off the reservation and get a different one. We don't know if it would be effective. After you've had your second dose, after about a week, you're considered fully protected. But again, fully protected is not 100%, it's 95%. Keep wearing your mask to protect yourself. And then the question about transmitting it to others. As you saw from the monkey data, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines protected the monkeys from infection, and so they would not be able to transmit something they're not infected with. We don't know if that is the case with people. And so to be cautious, we recommend masking and social distancing, not only to protect yourself, but also to protect others. And then one question which I've had several times, including today, is, my husband, my dad, my grandfather got the vaccine. A week later, he came down with COVID and he's in the hospital now. Did the vaccine predispose him to getting COVID, and why didn't it protect him? Well, it didn't predispose him to getting COVID. I'll tell you that right now. Why did he get infected? Because he was in the early stage post-vaccine. He wasn't fully protected. And, what's up with this? He got vaccinated, he got COVID, and my aunt knows somebody, and my cousin has a friend who this happened to. The fact is that COVID is so prevalent in our community, just by coincidence, you can get the vaccine and you can get COVID. That's all it is. There's nothing to suggest anything other than that.
Well, and that's precisely what we saw in both of the studies. If you look at a curve for a solid 10 days, even up to 14, they're indistinguishable, right? So you sort of see people start getting the disease because at any time people are getting disease. And right now, with as prevalent as it is in Houston, we're getting people left and right, obviously getting the disease.
Exactly.
But those curves are dramatically divergent after that 10 to 14 day period.
After 10 to 14
it's
days.
Remarkably so. So thank you for that explanation. Okay. What information for Pfizer and Moderna vaccines on length? I'm going to take this one and say we don't know yet. We're hopeful in the 1+ year range, but we really don't know yet. Dr. Sussman talked a little bit about potential for mutation in the future that might affect that. We also just don't know the durability of the immunity, other than that there's some very promising data out there from natural infection to suggest, because we're 11 months into this. So we're seeing some data in the 9-10 month range now, I think, Dr. Sussman. Is that accurate in the literature?
Yes, we are. And after natural infection, it looks really, really good up to 8, 9, 10 months. What we don't know is, the vaccines clearly are not the same thing as natural infection. You see, they're generating 5 to 30 times the antibody response that a natural infection will do. Does that mean you're going to get 5 to 30 times the immune memory? Absolutely not. Your immune memory could be lower with vaccines than with natural infections. So that's one possible issue. And then, as you pointed out, the mutations.
Thank you.
But I think you're going to be protected for a good year.
I would agree from what I've been looking at. So, I'm going to turn this one to Dr. Schwartz and listen to how many ways she can say no to this question, which is, I've heard this rumor too through my wife over at Texas Children's that we somehow threw away vaccines, which I'll just not say no, but hell no. Let me ask her maybe to jump in and explain a little bit how careful we are around the vaccines, from security all the way up to how we use the very last doses of the day every single day without wasting.
Yeah, so it's amazing how many rumors there are about this topic. One of the reasons I showed you the slide that we are remaining within hub location is because we have usually 3 pharmacists sitting down at every single site where we are. One draws it up, one checks it, and one makes sure that basically we are doing a quality control check from it comes out of the refrigerator to the table, that we use up every single one of those doses within the allotted times. At the end of the day, we start drawing up each one at a time to make sure that we have the exact number of doses. And we have one left over, we basically either go to our waiting list, we go up to the floor and get another healthcare worker, or we ask somebody to move up a day from tomorrow to today. So we do a huge amount of work to make sure that we are not wasting any doses.
Thank you, Dr. Schwartz. I was actually spending time with her one evening where we were on a Moderna day, which are 10 per vial. And when we got to the end of the list, we had one person in line and we would have had to crack a new vial. And we both spent time with that person, said, we'll put you in the front of the line tomorrow, but we don't want to crack a vial because it's a lot of work to find 9 additional people right at the end of the day when frankly we need to get our people home and resting and everything else. And they were so gracious. We brought them back in, got them in the front of the line and jumped the line at that point just to get them their shot. So it is down to, senior people, pharmacists, others managing every drop of this. We have significant security across the system as well because this stuff, as you can imagine, is like liquid gold right now. And so we're extraordinarily careful with these vaccines. Okay, so I'm going to take the next couple here. One is, it's been slow. I think I've already talked about that a lot. The next question was about the Biden administration setting a goal of 1 million inoculations a day for the first 100 days, which is a very noble goal. Let me just talk from the operational side of things. I am convinced with what I'm seeing across Houston with the planning that's happening here that if other communities like ours are doing the same planning, that if the vaccines are gotten out there, this can happen. Because what's happening right now, if you think about it, an institution like Methodist that's been doing this all along can ramp up. And I know, we sit there, literally biting our nails, worrying about getting enough vaccine to finish our week and get into the next week and all those kinds of things. A bunch of institutions that have lagged are doing a lot of catch up right now. So there's many that have sat there with some stuff in the freezers and now they're figuring out how to do their mega events, for instance, to use vaccine that's been sitting around for a couple of weeks. But they're getting into more of a steady state and we haven't tapped the pharmacies, we haven't tapped, city, county really at the level they could do many other things. So if the supply is there, and I don't have visibility into that, this is achievable, but I can't capitalize if on the supply, large enough. I just have no visibility in that. I don't know if the whole Operation Warp Speed and everything happening with the manufacturers is there to get that done. If they are, I think we can get there. It's not going to happen tomorrow, even if they gave it to everybody tomorrow, because there are a lot of places still figuring out what we have already figured out, but it will get there. I deeply hope. So next set of questions, timeline and other questions here. So Roberta, can you kind of come back in on this? You talked about some of this here, but could you talk about, again, some of the time frame of when we expect that people will be in different groups getting vaccinated with what we currently know? All of this could accelerate, obviously, if more supply comes in.
Yeah, so I do tell people we will be doing 75 plus, mainly 75 plus through the month of January. I do think that we will be vaccinating huge amounts of people in this 65 plus in the month of February. If the vaccine supply rolls out much more quickly, we will be able to get to other age groups faster. But at the speed where we're going, I think much of the month of February will be 65 plus. And then I think you're looking at March and April to vaccinate all of the younger age groups. I do think we will get multiple locations on within the month of February, and they tell us that we could expect a speeding up of the supply of vaccine towards the middle of February. So I think that will change the speed by which we get to the rest of these groups. But I know this is terrible to say, don't call us, we'll call you. But I promise we are getting to everyone as quickly as we can.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, just at Houston Methodist, our peak day, I think we did 4,700 vaccines. That was first and second doses. We can very solidly handle 10,000 a day between those two. So that's, vaccinating 30,000 plus first doses and then rolling into those second doses. That moves really quickly through a population just from us. And then you start magnifying that with everybody else, even at some smaller scales perhaps, and certainly with the distributed network of pharmacies. And once the supply's there, I think we can accelerate this a lot. So this question gets into, it's complicated, so bear with me for a second. But this talks about, about a week ago, we started hearing that the Biden administration was saying, hey, maybe we should not hold back second doses and should accelerate that. And actually yesterday, the Trump administration, I don't know if they came to this on their own or heard it there first or were just discussing it. The bottom line is this is a continual optimization process. But the bottom line is said, hey, that's a good idea and we're going to do that. So let me explain what that means, because it's going to be very confusing and it's going to be very misunderstood. So backing up, you've heard a lot of discussion in the UK about their decision. What they said was, rather than vaccinate our people 3 weeks after the first shot, which is what has been studied, and there's a little bit of flex in that 3 weeks, but plus or minus a little bit on that 3 weeks, we're going to just give first doses for 90 days, and we're going to hold it out to 90 days. Now, there's probably good logical reason to believe that could work. We do that, if somebody shows up really late for their second Shingrix shot in my office, or a Hep B series or something like that, we have a wide window of when those second booster shots can be given. But that has not been studied for this vaccine. So really the US consensus, starting at the federal level, the consensus of all of our clinical and scientific leaders, is that's not a good idea. Doesn't mean it couldn't work, but we want to stick with what's been studied. That's not, and I want to say that again very carefully, very clearly, that is not what this whole question's getting at, but it's going to get misunderstood that way. What happened was, from a supply chain side, the government said, and I'll use our example, we got 13,650 doses of Pfizer in week 1. That day, there were 13,650 doses of Pfizer sitting in a freezer somewhere at the federal level that basically, was earmarked to be shipped to us 3 weeks later. And we got it. And that's what we're using to vaccinate our second people. What they're talking about is, wait, is that really the best way to do things? We know that every day we're producing more. Hopefully that production is ramping up over time. And they're saying maybe there's a way to push more vaccines out quicker for first doses, sort of counting on manufacturing to fill that in 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later. At the end of the day, probably the right answer certainly wasn't hold all of them back. And I'm going to bet that the right answer is not don't hold any back as a safety reserve on aggregate. This is basically a business school, operations management optimization program process. I mean, you can get smart business school professor types basically figuring out this problem, and I bet you they can sort it out in a matter of days if they have accurate data on sort of the demand side and particularly on the supply side. So that's what you're seeing now. I think it's a really good decision, but I don't have visibility into the supply side or the analyses they're doing. So I don't know if it's all the way back or partially back with some withhold, but I do think this is another thing that hopefully will enhance first dose supply. If they, let's say, undershoot that a little bit and run into some problems in 3 weeks with second dose and it pushes people back a week or two, that is not a big deal. I mean, right now, if somebody in our staff is waiting an extra week to come back, other than we want to get the vaccine in, it's not something that we worry is going to, significantly diminish their ability to get vaccinated. So you'll, I think, continue to see that. But I predict, because I spent half an hour this morning explaining it to our PR people, because it's complicated, right? And I expect that in short press articles, short press bites, TV bites, etc., it's hard to understand, it's hard to communicate. So there'll probably be a lot of noise out there. But I think at the end of the day, whichever administration, doesn't matter, the process getting accelerated, I think, is a very good thing. Okay, so Dirk, you talked about the interchangeability. I think you already hit this question. So I'm going to move to the next one and talk about some of these questions here about any effect that the vaccine might have about your immune system, that kind of issue of does it in any way make you more susceptible early on? You kind of touched a lot on this already, but is there any science behind people who ask that question or think that might be a case?
No, there's no scientific reason to think that getting vaccinated, starts the process with some kind of dip in your immunity. Just no reason at all.
So the answer is no. It's just
correct.
Bad luck.
Bad
with
luck.
a lot of lot of virus.
Just
out
coincidence.
There. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so question about COVID, because COVID I know binds obviously all over the body. There are a lot of ACE receptors in the testes, and so it has been shown to decrease sperm count. So there's a question: could the vaccine do that? Is that something men should worry about?
There's no reason to think that. Obviously, there's not a lot of data on this. But the reason that you get decreased sperm count in COVID is that there's an inflammatory infection of the testes. That's not what happens when you get vaccinated. So I think there's every reason, if you're worried about your sperm count, to not get COVID and therefore to be vaccinated.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Okay, so now really complicated question. Talk about pregnancy and what the current thoughts are, recommendations are, evidence suggests around women who are pregnant.
Yeah. Well, the clinical trials excluded people who were pregnant, so there's really no data on this. What we do know is that if you're pregnant, you have a higher risk of a bad outcome from getting COVID. So again, I think the risk-benefit decision favors getting vaccinated even if you're pregnant or planning to become pregnant. And that, in fact, is the recommendation of the American College of Obstetricians and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, which are the two, expert bodies in America on these kinds of questions. So I would say, if you're not pregnant, you're thinking about becoming pregnant, and you're just really worried about this, take precautions and don't get pregnant for a couple of cycles after you get vaccinated. But really, there's no reason to think that being vaccinated would have an adverse effect on pregnancy or fertility.
So I was talking to one of our employees yesterday who's pregnant. I have a little boy, and she did a lot of research on that, spent a lot of time with her OB-GYN, and ultimately decided to get vaccinated and never looked back, said, I know I made the right decision. Yeah. She's actually can't pick out her boy's name yet, so she's having more difficulty figuring that one out.
Probably call him.
And, honestly, with what I've seen, if this were my daughter, I would most likely be saying get vaccinated if my daughter was pregnant, because I think again the risks of COVID I think far outweigh any risk that we don't even see a theoretical reason for, and we're hearing that from the societies. But that is, I think, and I make this recommendation very strongly, a pregnant woman should be having that discussion at length with her physician, her obstetrician, as to what the recommendations are, what the decisions are, where they are in the course of their pregnancy, other factors as well, as to whether they do that.
Same thing with people who have bad allergies. If you carry an EpiPen, you should definitely be talking to your allergist before you get vaccinated. Just if I could just add one thing, the follow-up comment to a lot of these safety questions is because it was developed so fast. How do I know it's safe in pregnancy? Because it was developed so fast. And the fact is that the speed of development is a couple of things. One is the RNA technology, which I think is a gift from the Almighty to our civilization. The other is, the clinical studies that these went through are exactly the same as for any other vaccine. So that final test was just as rigorous as any other vaccine undergoes. The real time savings is in the manufacturing scale up. And that was because the government backstopped financially the manufacturers and said, look, if your vaccine is a wipeout and you've spent, $1 billion, building a factory to produce it, we'll compensate you. That's really what saved the majority of the time. So had nothing to do with safety testing.
So here's a series of questions about when does it get back to normal, please? And I wish we all knew exactly. I do think you saw the projection curve. I do think if we can all do the right things now to bend this curve, we know it's going to come down. That's not going to get things back to normal, but we can be a lot better than we are right now. I think vaccines layer in on top of that, and I think there's very fair chance that schools feel virtually normal, sporting events feel, pretty normal by fall. Now, you don't hear me saying fully normal. I think masks are going to be a reality for a long period of time. I think there's going to be a lot of other dynamics there, but I do think if you're thinking about planning an event in the fall, other things like that, thinking about travel in the fall, I'm telling most people, good likelihood you can do that. But again, we don't know for sure. But reality, I still think 2021 is not going to be a year we look back on and say, boy, that last part was 100% normal. That's probably not going to be the situation. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it's much quicker. And a similar question to travel. It's interesting, right? Right now you're seeing Far East and the European Union and the U.S. Lead in vaccines. You're not seeing, dramatic efforts yet or dramatic ability yet in many other parts of the globe. So, it's going to be obviously safer to travel to some parts of the globe than others. You're going to be vaccinated. Hopefully, that'll protect you wherever you are, but not 100%. Obviously, you're protected even more if society around you is protected. So, I think if you're thinking about travel to some place like Europe in the latter half of the year, there's a fair chance that will be very doable from a social, non-business kind of aspect. But you'll need to think about that and make obviously individual decisions. And I would just say, stay tuned and watch where things are going. I do know a lot of people have scheduled things and then are saying, yeah, I'll cancel them if I need to cancel them during that time. I'm going to say very quickly, just to keep things moving ahead. There really is not a preferred vaccine. Get your first vaccine. You'll hear me say that you can get that. You'll hear me say that again in a second. Somebody asking about putting a child, an adult daughter in this case, in the Novavax vaccine. I'd encourage you to go in any trial you can. It helps society. I will tell you personally, we have been trying to get our 15-year-old into one of the trials. We've not been able to, but I'm confident enough to do that because we need to get the answer to that. But I'd love to have her protected as well, or at least 50%, or sometimes 2/3, 1/3 chance protected. We just haven't been able to get in a trial, but I will tell you, no question, and my wife's a pediatrician, the second my daughter, who's the only one in our family who's kind of below an age threshold, obviously I've got a son who doesn't meet any criteria right now, so he's long from getting a vaccine. But we will get her a vaccine the second we safely can and are approved to do that, and it's her turn, et cetera, et cetera. Roberta, a very quick question, just a short answer to any of the data sort of sharing. This is something about a common pass that would actually be, something that would be utilized to prove test results or vaccination results. Can you talk about that real quickly?
Absolutely. So for those of you who haven't followed in the Center for Innovation, we already actually link our EMR to the Apple Health record. So if Common Pass is going to link into Apple Health, we are all set. What we don't know is what is Common Pass going to link into. I can promise you that whatever it does, we will work on getting our EMR hooked into it for both Apple and Android. We just don't, we've been given no technical requirements yet.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. And when you do get fully vaccinated, you get a card which shows that, and then it's actually in Epic as well. So you can always pull those results down as well from Epic when you move forward. Okay, so how are people holding up? I always appreciate you asking this question. They're hanging in there. I mean, they're seasoned veterans. They're working hard. The morale's good. We're dealing with issues like, basically travelers, nurses issues around the country because everybody's in the same situation. So they are working to try hard and poach staff from every institution everywhere. That's been a real dynamic, no question. I will tell you, I go personally and deliver cookies and treats that people send in. There's a couple of you who know who you are and may be watching this who've sent us prodigious numbers of homemade cookies and other treats. I can't tell you how happy I am with that and how grateful I am and how much our staff just love it. I mean, they've all got a sweet tooth. I'm going to have a whole team of diabetics here eventually. But and I have a nutritionist to my right who's going like this, closing her ears. But seriously, all those little things you do mean so much to them. They're tired. I mean, if you think you're tired, imagine those frontline people and how tired they are, and they just want this to end. And so everything you can do to get us over this curve, and then we all run towards the vaccine and get vaccine as soon as it's our turn, please help us with that. And thank you for this, for that lovely question again. Will we have a rehab program, next meeting, or next one of these town halls, which is, I believe, March 4th, if I wrote my notes down. Yes, on March 4th, we're going to have the Center for Outcomes data, a lot of our big data approaches, and discussion about these activities at that event. So stay tuned, but that invitation will be coming out for March 4th. And then I want to close with kind of just some final words of advice. I may sound a little preachy here, but I just want us all to remember this because we're all chomping at the bit, and believe me, we all get it. The emotional release that happened for every healthcare worker who's been getting their vaccines. I mean, it's been profound and really, frankly, more than any of us thought it would be. And every one of you deserves that as well. So first off, the vaccines are safe, they're effective. Get them immediately when it is your turn. Please be patient. Everybody's working hard to do this fairly, equitably, etc. Remember, the state is setting the prioritization scheme. We then may sub-prioritize for very good reasons, but they set the overall scheme, so please wait your turn. Recognize you very well may get some side effects. They're common. Dr. Sossman talked about that, but they are way better than getting COVID. I will tell you, Julie and I both, when we got our vaccines, neither one of us had much of a reaction. We're both kind of disappointed because, we want to make sure it's working. So, there's as Dr. Sossman said, a lot of that reactogenicity is evidence that the vaccine's taking hold. Expect that, schedule around that a little bit. But most people are telling me, hey, it was no big deal. Here's the most important 2 bullets on this page. Take the first vaccine you're offered anywhere, anytime. I have had some people who, I didn't want to drive to that side of town. And then, I'm trying to do cleanup because they were one of the people we invited, but we ran out of slots or things like that. When you got a slot, go drive the 25 miles if you got to drive the 25 miles and go get it. If you can get this at some other clinic, if you can get it at a grocery store, at a pharmacy, at a city county event, some of the FQHCs have even, I know some people have gotten through them. Go get it there. We're going to do our best to accelerate to you as quickly as we possibly can. Obviously, we have as much vaccine as anybody right now for some period of time here in the city. We're trying to do that fairly equitably and as rapidly as possible. And then last, don't forget, for a long time going forward, even after you're vaccinated, wear your mask, do all the things you've been doing in terms of physical distancing. I have not changed my behavior one bit right now. I feel more confident, certainly, and I feel relieved, but I am out there masked everywhere I need to be masked or anything else that I'm doing right now, and otherwise not changing behavior. And I urge everyone to do the same till we get everybody protected. It's what we owe each other. And so with that, I'm going to end with an image and just maybe a little metaphor here. I remember December 31st, Julie and I and the kids managed to be at a little place we have in Brenham. And it was raining cats and dogs. I think it rained here, but it rained even worse there. And it was like 36 degrees. It was awful. And we just turned to each other and said, what a fitting end for just such a crappy year. And we all went to bed about 1:30 after celebrating the new year. And I woke up, I don't know, my usual 6 a.m., got up, sat on the porch, and this is what I woke up to. And it was just a beautiful, sunrise of new hope for a year that I think can bring us much hope. That hope happens when we all get this curve bent, and that hope happens when we all run towards the vaccine when it is our turn and get vaccinated as a community. And just think of what that can look like on January 1st, 2022. So come along with us for that ride of hope. And thank you very much for everything you've done to support us. Thank you for staying with us late today, but we just felt like these are such important questions and topics. We wanted to fully answer them for each of you. And God bless each of you. And thanks again for your support.